Taking a look at public goods and common resources. This chapter is shorter than average when considering the size of chapters in other textbooks. It's much more straightforward, a little less analytical. So you should find it a little less difficult. But nonetheless, it sets a important foundation for different types of goods and resources moving forward. So as an introduction, we consume many goods without paying. Examples include parks, national defense, which is a service, clean air, and water. We don't necessarily pay for those directly. When goods have no prices, the market forces that normally allocate resources are absent. The private market may fail to provide the socially efficient quantity of such goods. And we tie it back to Chapter 1. One of the 10 principles is governments can sometimes improve market outcomes by promoting things like parks, national defense, clean air, and water. So there are some important characteristics of goods that we need to consider. A good is excludable if a person can be prevented from using it. Excludable things include things like tacos, fish tacos, wireless internet access. You can lock people out of your Wi-Fi. And not excludable are things like AM/FM radio signals. They go everywhere, and no one's really locked out. And national defense. They protect all of us, and not just the ones that really want it and the ones that are indifferent. A good is rival in consumption if one person's use of it diminishes others' use. So something's rival in fish tacos. I'm not a big fish tacos guy, but if you eat, let's say there's a dish with 6 fish tacos and you eat 5 of them, that's 5 fish tacos I can't have. And something that's not rival is an MP3 file of Lady Gaga's latest single. Pretty much everyone can buy that. I'm not sure why you would, though. That's another story. So different kinds of goods are private goods are excludable. They're rival in consumption. An example is food. You can exclude me from what you're eating, and if you eat it, I can't consume it, so that's rival. And then public goods are not excludable and not rival, i.e. national defense. Your consumption of national defense does not affect my consumption of national defense. You can't exclude me from being defended by the Marines, and I can't exclude you from being defended by the Army. The fact that we blow up a terrorist camp somewhere does not affect that it gives you a benefit and also gives me a benefit. And then also common resources are rival but not excludable. An example is fish in the ocean. You and I can both take a boat out and go fishing. However, if you catch one big fish, that's one less big fish that I can catch. So that's rival, but it's not excludable. We can both be out there fishing. Club goods, excludable but not rival. Okay, club goods is something that you pay a little extra to achieve. Example would be cable TV. If you have cable and I don't, that's excludable. However, if I decided I wanted to get cable, it wouldn't affect you having cable, so it's not rival. So we can classify most goods in one of 4 categories in the slide. So as each example displays, you can explain why it belongs in which category and classification. So for example, food is a private good because it's excludable. You cannot have any food unless you buy it. It's rival in consumption. If you eat a fish taco, I won't be able to eat it, so on and so forth. So each one of these categories, I know when the first time I went through this, I thought it seemed a little bit convoluted, but when you think of it in terms of everyday things, it makes sense when you tell me a private good and you give me an example of food, and you tell me a public good and you give me an example of national defense, and a common resource such as fish in the ocean. And a club good is cable TV. Okay, it's excludable but not rival. So each one of them have these different aspects of excludability and rivalry. So I'll go ahead and answer the question. Yes, this will be on the test, and you will need to differentiate between private goods, public goods, common resources, and club goods, and maybe match up examples with what's a private good, what's a public good, what's a common resource, and what's a club good. So be sure you do the reading because it provides nice, easy examples for each. Okay, so let's categorize roads. A road is which of the 4 kinds of goods? Here's a hint. The answer depends on whether the road is congested or not and whether it's a toll road or not. So let's consider some different cases. Is it rival in consumption? Well, only if congested. If it's a wide open highway, it's not rival. But if it is congested, like Highway 29 is many times rolling through Spartanburg, or I-85 rolling through Pelham, so on and so forth, it is quite rival. Is it excludable? Well, only if it's a toll road. If you have to pay to be on it. Okay, then if you don't have to pay to be on it, it's not excludable. But if you have to pay to be on it, to be able to be on it, you have to pay. So otherwise, it's excludable. So there's 4 possibilities. An uncongested non-toll road is a public good. It's wide open. An uncongested toll road is a club good, something you have to pay to get into. A congested non-toll road is a common resource. Okay, it's first cousin to a public good, but it is congested, so there's some rivalry. And a congested toll road is a private good. So there's rivalry on a congested toll road in that there's a lot of traffic, and it's something that you have to pay for, so that makes it a private good. Okay. So I would strongly suggest that you work through some examples given in the text and then also write out this road example and make sure you understand why each is an example of what it is, and you will have a strong start to this chapter. So let's look a little more at the different kinds of goods. This chapter focuses on public goods and common resources because that's where a lot of issues arise. For both, externalities arise because of something of value has no price attached to it, something we're going to lead into called tragedy of the commons, which is the common economic explanation of the exploitation of public goods and common resources. So private decisions about consumption and production can lead to inefficient outcomes, let's say the overfishing of seas or the overuse of common grazing areas, which is the classic example of the tragedy of commons. Public policy can potentially raise the economic well-being and reduce externalities, as we discussed in the previous chapter. So let's delve a little bit more into public goods. Public goods are difficult for private markets to provide because of the free rider problem. Now, the free rider problem, we all know one, is a person who receives the benefit of a good but avoids paying for it. You know, the guy always shows up right after you paid the pizza guy? That's the free rider. If a good is not excludable, people have the incentive to be free riders because firms cannot prevent non-payers from consuming the good. So the result is the good is not produced even if buyers collectively value the good higher than the cost of providing it. So the textbook gives a simple example looking at a fireworks display in small town USA where certain people have to pitch in for the fireworks, yet certain people know that they cannot pitch in and then sit back and watch the fireworks, so they're free riders. And then another example would be like the cost of installing a street light in a neighborhood is less than the collective benefits of people who live on the street, yet no one takes the initiative to provide it because the ones that really want it realize that they're going to be the ones that do all the legwork, and if they provide the light, they can't exclude their neighbors from benefiting from a street light, keeping them from hitting the curb or stepping off a sidewalk or what have you. So if a benefit of a public good exceeds the cost of providing it, the government should provide the good and pay for it with a tax on people who benefit. So the government can spread the cost of a public good that has a benefit greater than the cost. So they can spread those costs more uniformly than they can on a private, in terms of private efforts. So the problem is measuring the benefit is usually difficult. People typically understate or overstate with their benefit. This brings us to the importance of cost-benefit analysis, which is a study that compares the costs and benefits of providing a public good. Cost-benefit analysis are imprecise, so the efficient provision of public goods is more difficult than it is with private goods. Private goods are more easily quantifiable in terms of value. When you get a public good, like what is the value of a bike lane on a bridge in across the river in downtown Charleston. There's a lot of interpretations there with cost-benefit analysis. However, there are many policy consultants that do cost-benefit analysis. I would love to be one of them to do more, that benefit greatly from providing their best shot at cost-benefit analysis to give values to what public goods bring to a community. So some important public goods are national defense, knowledge created through basic research, and fighting poverty. So those are all public goods. National defense, you and I equally benefit from it. I can't exclude you from it. You can't exclude me. It's not rival. Basic research provides a knowledge base to society, and fighting poverty benefits everyone, most importantly those that are poor. Now, shifting gears to common resources. Again, in this chapter, we're focusing largely on public goods and common resources. So common resources like public goods, common resources are not excludable. They cannot prevent free riders from using them, so you can't really keep them out, and little incentive for firms to provide because it's a common resource. If you can't exclude, they can't necessarily corner the market and profit off of it. So there's a role for government is seeing that they are provided. These common resources are provided. However, an additional problem with common resources is that they are a rival in consumption. Each person's use reduces the other's ability to use. So there's a role for government to ensure that they are not overused, i.e. the oceans are overfished and that type of thing. Now, we bring us to Tragedy of the Commons. Is a parable that illustrates why common resources get used more than is socially desirable. Let's say I have a setting of a medieval town where sheep graze on common land. This is the old classic example of the tragedy of the commons. As the population grows, there's more people there. There's more people, let's say more sheep farmers. The number of sheep grows. And there is again, a common area, a common pasture where they all graze. Now, sheep herders want their flock to be healthy, so they want them to eat. So they keep sending them out to the common area to graze more and more and more. And then more sheep come, and what happens, you start to wear out that common resource. There's less grass, it's been more trampled, the sheep have eaten everything up. The amount of land is fixed, and the grass begins to disappear due to overgrazing. So there's private incentives using the land for free. That's a big incentive to send your sheep out there, which outweigh the social incentives, which is using it responsibly, using it carefully, being good stewards of the land. Why do you care? Because you don't care because it doesn't cost you anything. So the result is people can no longer raise sheep. You don't have a place to graze them. So the tragedy is due to an externality and allows one flock to graze on common land and reduces its quality for other families. So people neglect the external costs resulting in the overuse of land. Another common example would be overfishing in certain seas in certain areas. Policy options for common resources. What could the townspeople or their government have done to prevent this tragedy where they just wore out the common resources? So try to think of 2 or 3 options in your mind. This could be one way to get you to anticipate the policy solutions to a common resource problem based on what you just learned about common resources, and it can test whether you make a connection between common resource problems and policies to deal with negative externalities, which we talked about in the previous chapter. So let's jump right into it. So some possible answers here is to impose a corrective tax on the use of land to internalize the externality, like we talked about in the previous chapter. You could regulate the use of land, the common and control approach, top-down approach. You could auction off permits allowing the use of land, so create grazing permits, and then let the shepherds trade those permits among themselves of who gets to graze what. You could divide the land, sell the lots to individual families, essentially issue property rights, and each family would have an incentive not to overgraze its own land. There would be a natural incentive to conserve and protect their lands, and then also keep other people's sheep off of your lands, which prevents overgrazing. So all of these policy options have been used in modern times to deal with common resource problems, and the following slide is going to show a few examples of that. So, the policy options to prevent overconsumption of common resources. You could regulate the use of the resource. You can impose a corrective tax to internalize the externality. An example would be hunting and fishing licenses, which limits overfishing or overhunting. Insurance fees for congested national parks makes it an excludable good. Auction off permits allowing the use of the resource. For example, spectrum auctions for the U.S. Federal Communication Commissions. They basically have to have permits to be able to use the airways. If the resource is, say, land, you can convert it to a private good by dividing and selling the parcels to individuals. For example, the FCC example, a frequency electromagnetic frequency spectrum is a common resource. It's not excludable. Anyone can, with the right equipment, can use it in broadcast. As rival in consumption, there's a limited amount of spectrum available. So if you take a certain frequency, that's a frequency that no one else can take. And the U.S. FCC has been auctioning off licenses to use parts of the spectrum since about 1994. And these auctions raise substantial revenue for the federal government and help allocate the spectrum of frequencies efficiently. Firms can use it. The firms that can use it most productively make the most money from it are paying the higher cost for each one. So it kind of excludes the ones that are just taking up space and not contributing. So some important common resources are clean air and water. Congested roads in general, fish, whales, and other wildlife that could potentially be overhunted, overfished. A good case study is You've Got Spam. Some firms use spam emails to advertise their products. Spam email is not excludable. Firms cannot be prevented from spamming. It's hard to prevent them from setting up spamming schemes. But spam is rival. As more companies use spam, it becomes less effective. It has less impact. You're like, oh man, I got another message from this spam thing. Let me just block it. If it's less common, there's more likely that people will take a look at. Thus, spam is a common resource. Like most common resources, spam email is overused, which is why we get so much of it. So, thankfully, this example is not in the textbook. As a side note, it says here, spam email is named after everyone's favorite delicacy. Yeah, I don't recommend the old spam, but if you ever find yourself in Hawaii, go up to a McDonald's. The Big Mac is the number 2 combo. The number 1 combo, at least it was about 10 years ago. My wife and I were there. The number 1 combo was the Spam Burger Hamburger combo meal, and the Big Mac was the number 2, which I found to be incredibly interesting. Hawaiians love some spam. I guess if you put a slice of fresh pineapple on anything, it'll taste good. Maybe not. So, in conclusion, again, a very short, to the point chapter. Public goods tend to be underprovided, while common resources tend to be overconsumed. That's a big takeaway. Public goods tend to be underprovided, while common resources tend to be overconsumed. These problems arise because property rights are not well established. Nobody owns the air, so no one can charge the polluters, I should say. So as a result, there's too much pollution. Nobody can charge people who benefit from national defense. Result, there can be too little defense. The government can potentially solve these problems with appropriate policies, i.e., taxes to fund public goods and common resources, taxes to fund public or national defense, for example. So in summary, a good is excludable if someone can be prevented from using it. A good is rival if in consumption if one person's use reduces others' ability to use the same unit. Markets work best for private goods, which are excludable and rival in consumption. And markets do not work well for other types of goods that we've discussed here, like public goods and common resources. Public goods such as national defense and a fundamental knowledge, a set of research that's for the best interest of all mankind that necessarily cannot be capitalized on financially, yet is very important, are neither excludable nor rival in consumption. So because people do not have to pay to use them, they have an incentive to free ride. Think about the guy showing up just after you pay the pizza man, or the people who come to the fireworks show who didn't contribute. Firms have no incentive to provide them because they can't capture the entire market. Therefore, the market provides public goods using cost-benefit analysis to determine how much to provide. So common resources are rival in consumption, but not excludable. Examples include common grazing land, tragedy of commons example we were talking about, clean air and congested roads. People can use common resources without paying, so they tend to overuse them. Therefore, governments try to limit the use of common resources by issuing permits, say for hunting or fishing, and so on and so forth. So, very straightforward chapter here, not very difficult. The tricky part is right here, discerning between private goods, public goods, common resources, and club goods. You will need to know that with specific knowledge on public goods and common resources and why it's an issue in a policy area. Okay, so public goods and common resources. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. I tend to respond to email pretty quickly. So thanks so much and take care.